Welcome, I'm Jay from EcoTech, and this is
Josh from Worldwide Corals.
in this video series, we're talking to a true expert, a true master about reef keeping, and we're basically asking him 10 questions. Some of these are your questions, some of these are our questions, but hopefully we all learned something. So when it comes to reef keeping, I feel like the talk of the town for the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years has all been about lighting.
Yep.
But lighting is just one of the three things. The other two big food groups of successful reef keeping are
Chemistry and flow.
chemistry and flow. So I thought for this section we would go with a few questions about flow. Obviously, we're a little biased on this topic, being a manufacturer of circulation pumps. But I thought kicking it off, because this is something you hear people talk about, high, medium, and low flow. How would you, as an expert with all of these tanks, actually define that in terms of water turnover in a system?
In terms of gallons per hour, I mean, honestly, I'm not a very good person to ask that to because I've never really paid attention to it, and I only pay attention to how the coral responds to it, and I can actually tell you where the little dial indicator on your vortex sits in certain tanks, but
No way, really?
yeah, I mean, really not by gallon per hour, honestly.
I think when we measured your systems years ago, though, for instance, on the acros, I want to say you had anywhere between 35 and 60x turnover. So if you're figuring that out, it's basically the gallons per hour rating of the pump at whatever you're running it at versus the water volume of that particular body that you're turning up.
Our acro tanks have a lot of flow. I mean, to the point where it's kind of a pain in the butt while the pumps are running if you're working in the tank.
Because it's so much water movement.
Right, but it's not constant. That's kind of one of the shining stars there is, constant flow is really, really tough on a coral, but it needs that volume. So just a piece of information to maybe hold on to.
No, I mean, that's a good one. I mean, that is something in flow in general is it's about water turnover. And I mean, that was always one of the things with the Vortec was wide but gentle flow. People are always want to angle it, but at the same time, really what is often most beneficial for tank is just stirring it.
Yeah.
A lot like in the ocean. I mean, think about the ocean, the reef. Every time you get water movement, it's millions of gallons of water one way and the other in a relatively small area. I mean, because it's all moving. So, so let's go to it from the more subjective. So who likes what in terms of flow, in terms of like common species?
So obviously acropora are always going to be, in that really high flow environment. And there's a lot of coral that actually fit that same criteria. You'll find things like clams, you'll find things like leathers, all in that really high upper reef slope in the wild. So you can recreate that same thing in your own home aquarium. All your big tabling acros, they need that flow.
Keep all the detritus out from the branches.
Yep, exactly. They end up, they form a cup, and they just collect everything. Most of your zoanthids, most of your mushrooms, they're going to do better in a lot lower of a flow scenario. And then the things that kind of fit the bill in between are maybe acans, lords, candy canes, chalices, things like that have more tissue on their body. They also need to get that waste out from in between them because an acan forms that cup also, and they catch a lot of detritus. But it's also part of its feature to collect food too. So, most of your LPS is in between that real subtle but strong enough flow. All your acropora is going to be high, and most of your softies, your zoanthids, your mushrooms, your clove polyps are real low.
So let's put that in dial perspective then. You got your reef crest mode set on your Vortec. Say it's appropriately sized for your tank. You want that MP40 most of the way up, all the way up?
The lower third.
The lower third.
The lower third.
Okay, so that's for your SPS, right?
No, that's for your softies.
Oh, for your
The
softies. So
lower
lower
third
third is for
for,
softies. Okay.
yeah, all the way to the
I
left,
was like,
Jay.
really? Okay. All right. So the lower third for softies,
Yep.
middle third for SPS.
Yep. And then
I'm sorry,
your
LPS,
LPS, and
and
then
then
your upper third
SPS.
for SPS.
All right. Well, there you go. Lower third, low flow, medium third, medium flow, and did I just say medium flow twice? Low flow, medium flow, high flow. One third, one third, one third on the dial. I
Flow for
like it.
dummies.
There we go. All right. You run a lot of Vortex at Worldwide Corals,
Yep.
and schedule-wise, I think where you're at now, and it's changed over time, but where you're at now is actually mostly reef crest, random, right?
Correct. And if you're running opposing power heads, we like to have the opposite of your pump that's going to be on reef crest.
So sync and anti-sync.
No, not necessarily. The green, so the constant speed
Oh,
mode,
okay.
we
Yeah.
run the other one on so that it's kind of doing the bulk of the water movement, and then the other one breaks up that to make it a little bit
Hmm.
more inconsistent, a little bit more
I actually
natural.
do think so. There's a white paper that we did years ago on Coral Lab, and actually, though, I still remember that. That was actually that hasn't changed. I think that was something that you did back then as well, where it was. But if you're interested, take a look at it because certainly on some of the systems, it was fairly well documented what you guys did for flow
Yeah,
and management.
most of the linear tanks, so your rectangular boxes, that's what we'll do. The power head that's in the most open water. So, normally our rock work goes from the bottom in the front towards the top in the back, and it kind of leaves that triangle window if you look at it in a cross section. And that power head that does the bulk of the stirring is up there so that it doesn't hit any of the corals and impact the way that they're growing or um, impact their livelihood, put it that way.
And and that's actually kind of goes into this other question, which is how can you tell by looking at it? Because I mean, that's one of the things which I think as you become an experienced hobbyist,
Mhm.
experienced with coral, everything becomes about looking at the animal. But from, you as a particular expert, like how do you look at something? You're like, that's getting too much flow, that's not getting enough flow.
It's almost always got to do with the skin. So even Acropora has skin on its body, and if you can see all the little definitions in its skeleton underneath, then the flow is just hitting that tissue so hard. Um, it's like being blown in the wind. When you stand in the wind and your shirt's completely stuck against you, it's very similar to that. You know, um, and almost always, if it's flow related, you can tell because one side of the coral looks one way and the other side of the coral doesn't. And that's not going to be a lighting situation. Usually that's flow.
How can you tell if it's not getting enough?
If a coral's not getting enough, I mean, really, that's the environmental thing, not the coral piece of it. If you can go like this and there's dust all around the coral, there's
You
ain't no
can tell
flow
it's
there.
not enough flow.
Yeah.
Yeah. And some corals will respond pretty badly pretty quickly when they're not getting enough.
Yeah, some of them will actually, they'll grab that dirt that's piling up around them and it'll start to stick to their tissue. And you can usually see that buildup. It's, the coral can't get rid of it. That's the problem. They'll actually form a mucus on the outside of them sometimes, and you can see it stick to that. They're not going to stay that way for very long.
Yeah.
They won't hang on.
Are there any resources currently to get the Mobius programs for what you're running at Worldwide Corals for Flow?
Currently, no, but that's something we're working on. We're developing what we're going to call our help center, and we're going to take a lot of this content and put it up there so that in your own leisure you can kind of go through the stuff and find out what it is that you're looking to find. I mean, there's a lot of information out there, so give us some time.
One of the things too, hopefully, is as we progress with Mobius, we'll actually get the worldwide templates in there as well so that you'll be able to write from the app to utilize the same stuff that Josh is using in the systems, which if you're purchasing your car from Worldwide, you'll be able to pick it right there on the app and run these programs as well. So
That'd be really cool.
that would be cool. Hopefully we'll get it done soon. Um, how does flow impact coral color and growth?
Color is going to be a byproduct, I think. I mean,
Just
a
good
healthy,
flow, healthy coral,
yeah, a
good
healthy
color.
coral is always going to have good color, unless, of course, it's, getting beat up by light or it doesn't have enough nutrition, however you want to say it. But it impacts the color as a byproduct. The shape is very direct. Usually in a really high flow scenario, your acropora will be much more robust. They'll have a thicker branch. They'll have more contrived branches, not so reached out. Monopora swirl better. The perfect circular picturesque monopora cap is actually a lower flow coral
Mm-hmm.
from what we found. Higher flow, they tend to just plate one big plate.
Interesting.
Um, Things like digitata, they'll grow a thicker branch in a lower flow situation. I mean, flow has a lot to do with the way a coral grows and shape because they actually utilize their shape to direct flow to their mouth.
Really?
Yeah, forgive me for not remembering where, but I read a study at some point and it talked about the microscopic cilia that a monopora will use to direct food.
Mm.
And they only grab in a certain orientation. So the way that it grows is a direct relationship to how it feeds.
And how the water is moving and
Yep.
bringing in
And they actually
particular
have the
food
ability
source.
to move the water on their own with the cilia.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah.
Wow, learn something new every day. So on a display tank then, going to a totally different aspect. So you're setting up your tank on a display tank. How do you like to orient the pumps if you have one pump, two pumps, etc.?
So two pumps would be kind of the starting point for anything that's longer than, let's call it, 3 feet.
So
Unless you're
3 feet or
using,
more, definitely have two, one on each end.
yeah, I mean, we have on display at the store, we have a EcoTech tank, and it's got two MP10s on it, which I think is perfect for the LPS, right? That tank, there's a couple of considerations. One, we wanted to view through it from the side properly, so we only have one power head on the side. And the way that the rock work is set up, we have the other one on the back. How would we set them up? It's really specific to how you're viewing the tank and how the rock work is set up. One on either end works. It's traditional. There's nothing wrong with it. Putting them both on the back, I never really found that it works perfect. It always seems like there's something that's not right about it. But that's an opinion. You know,
I think actually you kind of nailed it because one of the things that we always advise people to do is there's a kind of pragmatic element to reef keeping. Like people always ask for answers, but then there's also, you can usually figure out a lot of them on your own. And one of them is if you want a lot of water circulation, which is the goal, not obstructing the flow is a big one to getting the most out of that flow. So just like you said, where the rockwork is has a lot to do with the tank.
yeah,
With the tank.
a lot of tanks now are very minimal rockscape. It takes less water movement to actually accomplish that. That's a good
Yes,
point.
yeah. Compared to when we started back, I remember the classic reef tank was a big pile of rubble that went from the bottom to the top of the tank. Whatever, I
Hmm.
think it was something like I forget what it was, 5 pounds of rock for every gallon of water or something along those lines.
Way
Times change,
overkill.
yeah. Times change.
And it's part of the reason why you see sometimes we'll stick a power head in the back corner to kind of sweep the dirt, not necessarily for the dirt, but just that waste.
All right, coming to an end of pump and flow questions. This one is less about the flow and more about the pumps, but in your facility you have so many vortex. What do you do for maintenance?
They have so many power heads that they're supposed to soak and clean weekly. I don't know that number. Sean would be the guy to ask, but
So you're basically just rotating them out,
it's on a
wet sides
cycle.
out, and cleaning. So you have clean ones, and you run them for a period of time, and then
Yep.
switch them out. Got
Yep.
makes
That
sense.
way they never really get a solid buildup because it wears on the pump. Kind of like if you put the wet side and the dry side too close without the spacer. It's so much strain on the pump.
Yeah.
You let them get nasty and dirty. One, they're not doing what you want them to do, and two, it's beating the pump up.
So here's the final plug question. What do you like about Vortec pumps in particular?
The fact that they uncouple that easy and you don't have to pull them out of the tank all the way.
I guess for a commercial application, it kind of makes perfect sense, right?
It's incredible.
You don't have to, it's so much easier to maintain them.
The other really huge component is you can replace parts. So as it starts to break down over the years, because I mean, let's face it, it's in salt water. It's a terrible environment for a piece of equipment. You can replace the wet side. Most other pumps, when the pump is gone, it's gone. You just threw it away and now you've got a paperweight. That's huge, and they're efficient. I mean, we talked about heat in a previous segment. That's huge for people who don't live in an area where air conditioning runs all the time. It's a big component to why the Vortec is a good pump.
That's an interesting one because when we launched the Vortec, that was a huge deal.
Yeah.
Back when it first came out, before LED lighting, before the Radeon, before all these other DC pumps, like for instance, in our case, the Vectra and everything else.
Before the Quiet Drive.
Yeah.
So much more heat. Hotter.
They were hotter. But so much of that heat went into the tank. And then now, with the Vortec, that didn't happen because it was outside. And now we're a little less sensitive to that because we're used to not generating as much heat. But yeah, pretty crazy. And then I think they're probably pretty well suited for your commercial systems, just that wide flow too. At least I'd like to think so.
I can agree, Jay.
Okay, thanks, Josh. Appreciate that. All right, guys, that concludes these questions on Flow with Josh. Thank you very much, Josh.
Thanks, Jay.